Monica. Good morning. Can anybody? Monica, can you hear me?
Good morning.
Good morning. Is that Michelle?
Yes.
How are you this morning?
Good. Hope you are.
I'm just excited to be here.
All right.
Hopefully everybody will be on with us here in a minute.
Awesome.
Rod, is that you?
Yeah, it's me. How's my? Can everybody hear me? Okay.
Yes, I can hear you fine.
That's awesome. Yeah. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Anybody get snowed in yesterday?
It was a little chaotic here in the mountains.
Yes, it was. I was at my condo. I'm back at Lake Norman this morning, but I was at my condo, and the registrar called me and said it's snowing in Bowling Springs, and I said, well, it's just drizzly rain here. I see a flake every now and then. But by the time I got ready to leave, and I left Lake Lure, and the time I got down to Green Hill, which is about halfway to Rutherford, It was a blizzard, and people were having to pull over, couldn't see the road. And the road was covered. And so I waited about 20 minutes, and it just got worse. And so I struck on out. I had to be on campus. Went sliding down the hill to Rutherford. It was bad all the way down to Rutherford. I was able to finally get down to the bypass, 74, the 4-lane, and it was clearer, but it snowed. Time I got to Bowling Springs, it had tapered off, but we had I don't know if I'd be able to get back Monday into Lake Lure or not, because it was bad, really bad. I don't know. Hopefully it didn't freeze over last night so I can get back to my condo Monday.
No, it's about 45 here now, so it didn't. I don't think it was cold.
Good. It was. Those flakes were so big, and it was snowing so hard about sideways that it was really tough to see the road from Green Hill to Rutherford. But I thought about going the other way and coming down 9, but the problem with that for me is when I leave Lake Lure, I can go to Bowling Springs, either back down 64, 74 through Rutherford and catch 74 bypass down there, or I can come back down 9 and through Polk County and catch 74 much further on up near Columbus. But the problem is, and I know they do this intentionally, just as soon as I leave Lake Lure going that way and I cross into Polk County right there at Lake Lure coming down 9, for that 15 miles or more, I have no phone service. And if something goes wrong, I can't call anybody. It's so aggravating. Now, if I stay in Rutherford County and go to the same place, I have phone service all the way. But if I go the main road, which is much easier, much straighter 2-lane road and 10 or 15 more miles of 4-lane road going that way, but I don't have any phone service. So I don't know. I guess AT&T doesn't work Polk County, I guess. And so my signal is jammed. So what an ordeal. So I had to come back down the little windy 2-lane road in the snowstorm so I'd have phone service. But such is life. All right. Well, I see it's 9 o'clock. Let me stop my share here and see who we got this morning. All right. There's Jeff. Good morning. Raven, Shell, Hannah, Keisha, Christina, Rod. I see Jewel. Oh, we got a lot of folks this morning. All right. Good morning. Welcome. This is DEOL 738. Thank you for being with me this morning. I'm going to go ahead and hit share on my screen, and I'm going to quickly go through our materials and then we'll get to our presentations. In your case study materials folder, there was a document put together by Dr. Hamilton, shared with you when you started 7:30. That's supposed to be the standard directions for all case studies in the DEOL program. I know y'all have been doing a lot of these face-to-face in class. I don't know, have y'all been doing any case studies online or in Zoom sessions? Great. So you know the case study directions. I'll close that one. And then he had a presentation rubric. And then he had a grading rubric. Let's see. And then he had then we have the presentations, which are your PowerPoint that you do, and then your reflection after we get done. And he had rubrics on each of those. So all that material was there. So start out this morning to kind of set our case study this morning. There was 5 questions at the end that you had to answer, but just a brief overview. The purpose of this case study is because, in particular, there's pressure from funders for nonprofits to measure and demonstrate the effectiveness of their organization. Now, that's not just in nonprofits working with community action groups, homeless shelters. That's also in public and private organizations, especially public ones that have to go to county commissioners, city council people. Everybody is vying for the same dollars, whether it be the community college, whether it be the public school, whether it be police, fire, public safety, and everybody needs to be able to demonstrate their effectiveness, to measure and demonstrate the effectiveness of their organization. And that's what this course is really all about, is teaching you how to measure organizational effectiveness for yourself and for others. And that's the last segment that we'll do in our course, is program evaluation. Now, the task of this particular consultant was to create a report measuring organizational effectiveness. Now, we know there's 2 types of measures. There's qualitative and quantitative. Quantitative, and for the purposes of this case study, would be how many people do you serve? That would be quantitative. Qualitative would be is how well do you serve them? Now, the problem always comes in is which is more important? And that's part of the discussion that a consultant has to have with all the stakeholders involved. What do you value? What metrics do you value? And so that's your first issue, is you have to get some sort of consensus as to what's important. Is it quantitative? Is it qualitative? Is it a mix of both? And you have to bring reliability to the process, and that's what they're talking about. They need someone from outside the nonprofit community for the report to be credible. And that's what reliability is. It's credible, that we know it's real and true, and it's valid, that it measures what we say it measures. So that was our task. But one of the things that we have to remember is our continuum, and we had that from chapter 2 in Salkheim. What is, and when we're doing research and we're doing, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, there's a continuum of relationship from causal through correlational to associational or association. And we talked about that at length when we were together last. In a rule of thumb is we seek to show causal relationships or correlational relationships through quantitative data, we seek to show associational results or relationships through qualitative data. And so let's remember that we can't always show cause. Drinking water won't make the bird fly. That would be causal. We look for correlational things, and then when we look at qualitative data, we're looking for associational. We're looking for patterns or themes that emerge. We talked about those at length to get you prepared for this case study, and so I'll roll on down to the end in this case study. But then at the end, you had 5 questions that you were to answer, and I won't read through those because you will. And so if you were the consultant in this case, 5 recommendations, and we'll go down there through each one of these. All right. Who's ready to present this morning?
We are.
Keisha, is that you?
Yes.
All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop my share. I'm going to go to manage participants. I'm going to click on Keisha and more, and I'm going to make Keisha the host.
Kidia.
No, Kidia. Oh, excuse
Yeah.
me. No. Kidia, there you are. I'm sorry. I thought it was Keisha. All right. So I'm going to make Kidia the host. Yes. You're now the host, and so if you will hit your share screen, we can see your screen. And I'm going to, there we go.
So good morning. I hope you all can hear me. Having a bit of a difficulty this morning, so I have to plug my Chromebook up. So
we can hear you.
Okay. Go for it, Rod.
Okay. Yeah. Good morning. So we, as we know, this case study focused on a large coalition of nonprofit networks in the Austin, Texas area. The coalition focuses on community development and social service issues. So there's several key stakeholders. If you'll slide to the next, thank you. So the funding sources, of course, are some key stakeholders, likely to be external stakeholders. They're comprised of investors, grant writers, and then, of course, board of directors, and then the community, the beneficiaries. So we have a host of benefactors and, of course, beneficiaries in the Austin, Texas community. So let's go to the learning objectives here.
So part of our of the learning objectives was the question, so the complexities of measuring the effectiveness in the nonprofit sector. So a couple key things that we discussed as it relates to measuring the effectiveness in nonprofits. Just the overall theme when we were reading through was that we found that nonprofit organizations create their own theory of change. So they kind of mission driven. And so according to their mission and their purpose, and so that makes it a little hard to measure in their own outcome and impact measurements as well. We found that difficulties exist in trying to find the best approaches or approach to quantifying success. And these are the inability to measure effectiveness through certain metrics such as membership increase. More members don't equate to true effectiveness, especially when there's a misalignment with the mission of the organization and the actual output. Keisha, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Forgive me. So what we did was kind of like a compare and contrast of business-like approaches versus holistic approaches. And the differences that we saw were the impact was financial stability, longevity and growth when you think about the business approach, a reduction of waste and streamlined processes, and being the best at the competitives, which kind of goes back to what we were talking about, the mission statement. Holistic approaches more so look at like the service delivery, how the customers feel, a happy staff, and the quality of services.
So one of the key things in the article was the importance of communication and organizational effectiveness, and each organization being able to effectively communicate with funders, with key stakeholders. So communication allows key stakeholders to see the effectiveness of the organization. And there was a recurring theme of it's just not a conversation, but you want your funders, you want your key stakeholders to actually be engaged in the services provided. You want them to actually experience what you're doing in the organization. So it's just not a conversation, it's an experience. And then the role of communication allows funding sources to see the need that continually exists. So you want your funders to know there's still work to be done and we need more money. So being able to communicate that as an organization is highly important to continue to get those funds in so organizations can do the work that they set out to do. Ways we came up with to communicate is through newsletters, and you can do those both electronically and paper for those that are not computer savvy. And newsletters give the opportunity again to communicate what we are doing as an organization to impact the people we say we're going to serve or the community that we say we're going to serve. It's a good way to put in both qualitative and quantitative information. How many families did we serve this year? How many veterans did we help get employed this year? And then also maybe having blurbs from your consumers on, hey, how did this organization help me and my family? Another way to communicate is through open house. So you invite your key stakeholders, you invite your funders, you invite the community to kind of come into the organization and to literally see what we do on a day-to-day basis. This open houses give the opportunity for your key stakeholders and your funders to talk to staff, hopefully getting good reports, gives them the opportunities to even talk to some consumers. And of course, as an organization, you can kind of handpick, consumers and staff that you want to share, or it can be transparent and just have that as an open opportunity for anyone that would like to share. And then having open board meetings where your key stakeholders and funders could come in and learn kind of internally what's going on, and then also what your goal is going forward. So then we have the term of this social construction and its effect on organizations. And so we decided that this includes engaging your key stakeholders and funding sources in constant communication regarding the performance of the organization and its impact on the local community. So again, this is keeping that communication open. But it goes a little bit deeper than that. This is where you have the opportunity to engage your key stakeholders and your funders in joining in your mission and vision of your organization. So it's just not telling them this is what we'd like to do, but it's getting them involved to share your vision and getting their buy-in, which hopefully leads to more funding support and more support in general. And that's what we've discussed for social construction.
So this is where we, considering the learning objective, this is where we decided that basically the central issue of this particular case study is the management of key stakeholder relationships. And that is both quantitatively as well as quantitatively. So both, not only how well we're doing, but how we are doing that as far as numbers are concerned. So we felt like it was a both quantitative as well as qualitative in managing those key stakeholders relationship, particularly in the backdrop of this particular case study. So when we considered the central issue, there were some secondary things that we discussed initially, like, there's possibly the lack of communication, being that the fact that there was an economic downturn where there was less money and services available, and probably a bit of a competition amongst nonprofits in terms of the monies or seeking or getting those grants. Budget cuts and decreased tax revenues, as well as the inability to measure programs. And that goes back to how we're going to measure the effectiveness internally. And then there was we had a discussion about the MQ mission statement, making sure, part of that is clear, as well as the reevaluation of board members. Basically, the ability to make those decisions that are important in moving the effectiveness of the organization forward.
So with that, the 5 recommendations that our consultant team developed were, first, to restructure and revise the CAN mission statement to include goals that are measurable, because that was one of the things that, as we talked to different experts in getting our information as a consultant team, we realized that sometimes the mission statements of nonprofits are not measurable. So we said as a consultant team that we would first restructure the mission statement to make sure that it allows for measurable goals. Then after that, because there are so many different stakeholders involved, we thought it would be necessary to facilitate a meeting with the nonprofit stakeholders to come to an agreed upon parameters to determine nonprofit effectiveness. And those stakeholders we thought would be people who are funding sources, our volunteers, individual donors, and then the local business partners of Austin. And the next recommendation we said is that we would develop a mid-year and end-of-year evaluation process to progress monitor whether we are meeting our goals that are set in our mission statement with fidelity, and to make sure that the things that we're doing throughout the year are supporting the allocation of resources that have been granted to us financially. One of our consultants, or one of the people that we talked to as a consultant team, was someone who came from the business world, but now was working in nonprofit. And so one of the recommendations that we thought would be important would be to identify a business model of operations that could be adaptable to the nonprofit sector, or either find another nonprofit organization that is doing a model successfully that we could kind of, that goodness of fit, pattern ourselves behind. And lastly, we thought it was very important to reevaluate the organization's management and board of directors, because we may not have the right people on the bus leading us in this effort.
And so that brings us to the alternative solution that we discussed as a team. The first and foremost thing that we felt that as an alternative solution was to really generate a clear and concise mission statement that goes beyond surface level. Really something that all stakeholders, both internal and external stakeholders, can subscribe to. And so that's very important to have these values and aims explicitly identified, and label those mission critical objectives. And then by doing so, that would allow us to take a step closer to measuring the effectiveness, both qualitatively and quantitatively. Secondly, like we discussed, enhancing communication channels. As Raven discussed, newsletters, open house. The open house, like she stated, goes beyond the surface. It gets in the trenches of what we do, of what CAN does, and it allows stakeholders to have a firsthand rather than a secondhand or hearsay experience. So that's very important. And I'll bounce back to number one. That's good in terms of the evaluation of that solution. And of course, the enhanced communication. I kind of discussed this and labeled it as uncertain. And I know that sounds kind of contradictory, but and justifying.
We lost you, Ron.
Is it? Are we there?
You're back.
Okay, my apologies. But in justifying the uncertain evaluation for line item number 2, we can have great channels of communications. We can avail, can have an open house, but without total buy-in from stakeholders, it's kind of uncertain. So that's why we kind of label it that way. And then moving on to number 3 here. Consider reevaluating and or removing existing boards. As Keisha stated, we might not have the right people in the right seats, and we don't want to stretch people beyond their capacities. And also we need to consider how we're bringing people on board. The onboarding process. So it may be a little laborious up front, but really putting the legwork in and investigating who we're putting in charge and what they're doing, the scope of their responsibilities. And that's mixed there again, without these mission critical objectives. We can have some really talented and competent people on staff, but if we're just kind of stabbing in the dark, if you will, we'll certainly have mixed results. Then of course, number 4, internal comparison of current statistics from previous years. So this is one of those obvious ways that you can kind of measure your success rate in a quantitative sense. Just kind of see, if the focus is to have, an increase in memberships, then, and this, by the way, this is just an example, but if the focus is to have an increase in membership, then we'll just simply use the baseline from the previous years versus what we've got this year, our current participants. So, and that's good, but there again, it goes back to line item number 1, which we'll reiterate, we have to explicitly identify these critical objectives, what we're about.
Okay, so we feel that all of our recommendations and solutions are necessary. However, this is the timeline that we feel the organization should start with. First, revisiting and restructuring the mission statement, making sure that the mission statement is clear and that the agency is measuring outcomes, that it match what they say they're going to do, both qualitatively and quantitatively. Next, we suggest for the organizations to shadow a good fit organization with similar demographics to learn their outcomes and adapt a business model. Similar to like what we talked in class, making sure that they pick an organization that is very similar in looking at their outcomes compared to this good fit outcome. Next, we suggest facilitating an open meeting that would include the board of directors and key stakeholders. And the goal of these meetings would to again clarify the communication process, to communicate what needs are there, the outcomes and successes, and what opportunities are still available for growth. Also in those meetings, the evaluation tool that we talked about in our recommendations will be developed. And then lastly, to actually implement the evaluations at a 6-month and 1-year mark to see where they are and where the need continues and to make changes as needed.
At this point, if there were any questions, Dr. Lamb.
Okay. Anybody have any questions they'd like to ask at this time? All right. I'm going to reclaim the host. All right, that gets us back to our screen again. All right. Before I break this down a little bit, what a wonderful presentation. I am sitting here with kind of tears in my eyes this morning already. You folks just demonstrated what this course is about. You're supposed to take all the things, and this is why it's in the middle of your block. You're supposed to take everything that you learned up to this point and now start trying to make it make sense. How do you use it? And that's what you folks have just demonstrated. That y'all have been paying attention. I heard phrases and terms and concepts from every one of the blocks that you've had. And that's my goal is that now you start being able to apply it, to use it. This is a practitioner's course. Told you that from the very beginning. That's the first thing we talked about. Is I'm not trying to train you to be quants. I'm trying to train you to be leaders who know how and when to use data and statistics. And that's what you've proven this morning. It won't be the dominant theory or theme of what you do, but you have to understand it's the unifying field theory, like in string theory, in physics. This is the thread that runs through everything, and that's what you've demonstrated this morning. And that makes me very happy. I'm very excited that you understand fidelity. That's when you talk about looking at not only the board members, but the employees and doing mid-year check. That's a fidelity check. That's central to data collection. It's central to data analysis. One of the things that folks make the biggest mistake about, and I harp on this one all the time, they think that a midpoint check is looking at the outcomes. No, we got to look at the people. Fidelity check looks at people. We sometimes call that formative assessment, but we've got to make sure that our people are doing what we want them to do along the way. That's central to any evaluation process, is what are the people doing? There were so many good points to this one that I really loved. I loved your timeline. And I love some of the other points that you made. I won't belabor the points, so we won't be on here. I could talk about this one all day. But a couple of things I want to highlight, and you folks hit upon it. Money is not infinite. If you give me more, somebody else gets less. And you've got to be able to demonstrate, not just tell people that I deserve more. You've got to demonstrate. And as Rod said, you've got to have some goals. You've got to show some data. You've got to have some measurable outcomes. Love Rod, that piece of Rod there. That's what people want to hear. Thursday, Wednesday, what's the day? Saturday? What day was it? Wednesday? Wednesday morning at 10:30. Myself, as program coordinator, Mel's program, Dr. Hamilton, Jeff, program coordinator, DEOL program, Dr. Laws, program coordinator, LS, Dr. Putnam, program coordinator, EDCI. I guess that was it. Us four, the dean and the associate, the dean. We had to go up the hill to the budget meeting with the cabinet, the president and the cabinet. Now, it was understood our mission and vision and all those kinds of things, but we had to go up and talk about numbers. We had to go up and look at revenue and revenue streams and all those things. Remember, Gardner Webb's a nonprofit. We had to go up there and look. Now, it went well for us. It was, a nice, pleasant business meeting, very professional. I didn't get to tell any jokes or anything, but that's okay. It was good. But the tone of that meeting went really well because we knew our numbers. the group that had gone previous to us the day before did not know their numbers. It did not go well. We were in a budget meeting about how to allocate resources in the university. There was a group that showed up before us that didn't know their numbers. They didn't know if they were good, bad, or indifferent, but you better believe the university did, because they had the finance men sitting there. He knew their numbers. They didn't know their numbers. It did not go well for them. We knew our numbers. It went extremely well for us when we visited the funding source or authority. We knew our numbers. So that was central to your presentation, and that's central to this course this morning. You need to know your numbers. You've got to know your numbers. You've got to know, but it's not just how many dollars you spend or how many you serve. You've got to know all of your numbers. Tricky is you got to agree on what all your numbers are. And when you've got various stakeholders, I love the part where we talked about communication. We got to get everybody together. What are our numbers? We have to agree on those. Now, we've already done that as in our nonprofit. We have all kinds of different meetings where we discuss what's important, mission, vision, and all those things, and the quality. And we have to run our statisticals on how well our graduates are doing on time, how well they're doing in their job, all that. But that's all within the context of when we come to that budget meeting, we know our numbers. We know that our graduates exceed the state average in the highest two evaluation categories out there. We know what our rank is among the 15 colleges that are measured in North Carolina in preparation programs. We know what our rank is. I know that, I knew that I was going to have an easy day because the MELS program of the 15 colleges in North Carolina, we're ranked #1. It took us a number of years. We finally beat Chapel Hill. So we have the #1 ranking. I was going to have an easy day. But I had to know what those ranking metrics were and direct our efforts in those. And so if you know your numbers, budget meetings and where you talk about allocating resources go really well. If you don't know your numbers, if somebody asks you a question, if they ask you a question in a budget meeting, they already know the answer. They're just checking to see if you do. So you better know your numbers. There was one more piece that I was just so excited, goodness of fit, where you were going to go and shadow a similar organization. That may be the best practice in all of organizational consulting. In 2010, 10 years ago, I had a doctoral student, and there was a requirement that she do a program evaluation of her program inside of a large nonprofit organization. She was my doctoral student. I worked in that organization, but she was my doctoral student at Gardner-Webb. And you know what the first thing that she and I did? We went and visited and interviewed and shadowed a goodness of fit organization before we started anything else. And we did 3 of those. We went to 3 organizations that had the exact same program, and we picked one that looked exactly like ours, a large urban district. We picked one that was completely opposite of ours, and we picked one kind of halfway in the middle. Now, I know that we're not quite halfway in this course yet, but anybody want to tell me why we looked at one exactly like us, one exactly opposite us, and one halfway in the middle? Why did we do that? We've talked about goodness of fit, and you understand why we went to one that looked just exactly like us. But why would we go to the other 2 as well before we started this intensive program evaluation that would end up being, you know, a lot of money and a lot of personnel. Why did we do those other two?
I think maybe to glean from from the other two, I think you have to know, like, glean from what maybe there are things that you can bring in, but I think also knowing looking in their target population, you know, what we don't have. So a comparison and a contrast. And so why is it that they are able to do? So if you went to an urban area and you all were a rural area, the people are different. The size may be different. And so also to show you what you don't have, so that you can maybe tweak. Yeah, that would be my rationale.
Mm-hmm. We talk about two big themes in this course: reliability and validity.
Mm-hmm.
What Keisha just talked about was validity. I mean, you know, what do they do with these people? That is this an accepted? Does this get the outcome desired? That's validity. Are we measuring what we say we're measuring? So we wanted to make sure that no matter what size or type of organization, that we were using the same metrics. That's validity. And we went to different ones for reliability. You know, does it work the same everywhere?
Mm-hmm.
That's what reliability is. Does it work the same in Murphy as Manio, regardless of the organization? Does this work the same place? Do these measures work the same? Well, you can't just go to one that looks like you and say, well, this is a reliable way. No, you've got to look at everybody, you know, every type of organization. The monitoring, the going to, the goodness of fit, that's most important. That's critical. But to be credible, for validity and reliability's sake, you also want to look at completely dissimilar and then something kind of in between.
Okay.
So we were working in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, big urban district. And so we went to Brunswick County, you know, which is kind of halfway in between. They've got some beach, got some urban areas, they've got some affluent areas. It was kind of halfway in between. We went to a small county in where did we go? We went to northeastern North Carolina, to a small county, and then we went to Greensboro, which is the closest fit to Charlotte. And so we looked at one that looked just exactly like us, one that was kind of halfway in between, and then we looked at one that was completely rural. And that was for validity and reliability purposes. That's the kind of thing that you have to do as a consultant. But I love I love that y'all pointed out, you know, the goodness of fit. I think that's so important to go and visit another place, especially one that looks like you. And then for the credibility factor, remember that was your charge, was that you're coming in from the outside because they want credibility. And credibility has two pieces: reliability and validity. That's what credibility is. When we put those two together, we call that credibility. But they have to both be there. And that's what these folks were looking for in this case study, was credibility. Somebody who we can believe what you say. You're not part of the organization who's going to put their thumb on the scale and make it come out like we want it to. You as a consultant, you as that role, have to provide that credibility. You do it with reliability and validity. I'm asked that question all the time. Well, how do people believe in us? Why are we credible? Because we used ethical methodology to arrive at the conclusions that we came to. Central to that is goodness of fit. We have to go out and look at somebody that looks like us, and it's also good to look at either for the credibility piece, either end of that scale. And so hopefully, the things that you've learned in 732, 4, 6, I see that theme. I see all those. I saw You know, I saw SWOT, I saw Collins, I saw mission vision, I saw strategic planning. That was your timeline. I saw every part of every course you've had so far. This is the unified field theory, like string theory in physics. This puts it all together. And that's what you're supposed to do. And it flowed very nicely. I especially liked your timeline. What a great job. Well, I tell you, if y'all had a really good instructor, y'all would be, there's no telling what y'all could do if you had somebody really good. This was great. I am so pleased. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, who's next?
We'll go next.
Oh,
Monica?
Yeah, we'll go next.
All right, Monica's going to go next. All right, I'm going to go to, no, I better do that. All right, I'm going to stop my share. I'm going to go to manage participants, and I'm going to find Monica. There she is. And I'm going to make her the host. Do you want to change to Monica? Yes, I do. And I'm going to stop my share. And if Monica, if you'll just press on share on your dashboard, there we go. Look at that.
All right.
Kenny,
do you want to get us kicked off?
Good morning, everyone. This is group 2, which includes Monica, Christina, Jeff, and myself, Kiana McNeil. Some of the people in the case were, well, the main people in the case, I'm going to give you a little background, was the consultant, which we didn't have a name, but the consultant will be assisting Luke with measuring effectiveness. We had Luke, which is the director of CAN. Robert Herman and David Rians was professors of University of Missouri that wrote some of the articles that was used for the interviews. Dr. Luke, professor of communication at University of Texas, and we had Lucinda Bucket, the director of United Way, that gave some great insight, and Larry, director of Austin Foundation, which is a private organization, and he had a few different views. We had Roderick Buffkin, which operates a large homeless shelter downtown, and some of the people. CAN is a collaboration of nonprofit organizations and government agencies working on social services and community developments in Austin, Texas. And they work somewhat of a hub or a clearinghouse for the nonprofit community. Right now, they're currently under pressure to measure and demonstrate the effectiveness of organizations. They have, because of the funding issues and more unemployment, less money, but more demand on the system. That's what's going on. Now we're going to go over some of the key stakeholders that's affected by the nonprofit organization. Stakeholders are the people that are affected by the organization decisions and outcomes. Some of the stakeholders in this case are the donors that give the funding to the nonprofit organization, the customers and the clients that they serve are also stakeholders, the board members of the nonprofit organization. Now I'm going to talk about some of the employees. The paid employees are stakeholders because, they're paid from the organization. Now, some of the most important employees of our organizations are the unpaid volunteers which support the mission and the vision of the organization. And they're the stakeholders because they're your backbones. They're unpaid. They're there because they want to be there. And, they're going to push out your mission and your vision. The community are stakeholders of the nonprofit organization because the organization serves them, and the suppliers that provide the supplies for the organization. One of the key things that we thought from the case of the stakeholders that's important for the stakeholders is communicating to the stakeholders about the performance on a consistent basis will help them It's important to demonstrate a need to the donors and the funders and provide numbers and information to them. Communication is the key. Having a process in place that can be evaluated and measured with results from those processes will help the stakeholders understand the effectiveness of the organization. It will show some kind of measuring tool. Because the people that's providing the funding, they must know what's going on and be kept in the loop. That's why communicating what's going on with the organization and those numbers of the organization is very important.
Okay, some of our secondary issues is that there's a lack of communication with the organizational effectiveness with the various groups. So we want to make sure that we're communicating with our stakeholders, getting different analysis to see what the issues really are. Because right now everybody's kind of doing something a little different. There's no data or evaluation systems to actually measure. So we want to make sure that we look at the effectiveness through both quantitative and qualitative analysis. A lack of best practices. Everyone tends to be doing something different. So we want to kind of see what others are doing so that we can go in and set up some best practices for our organization. Then there's various culture of the organization. So everyone is ran differently, looks at everything differently. So we want to make sure that we go back and look at the vision and make sure that the vision is measured to the outputs of what we're trying to achieve. Then we have the profit versus nonprofit, and then the impact from the stakeholders. One group wants one thing, another group wants something different. So the profit, of course, is looking at it from more of the business aspect of it. And then the nonprofit is looking at it from a different perspective. So we just want to make sure that we can do what's best and get the impact from others on what we need to do. And then there tends to be tension between the business metrics and the service of the missions. So for us, we considered our central issue to be a lack of evaluation systems, lack of evaluation system that meets the needs of all of our stakeholders.
So as we start to think about what recommendations we would make for the actual report, which is what the consultant was brought in to kind of think about and add some structure to, we have kind of 5 general recommendations for the report. And one thing that we really took into consideration for this was that CAN is really a conglomerate or a collaboration of many different nonprofits. So it's hard to have really specific things because each nonprofit has a very different central mission that they're trying to accomplish. So we try to focus on broad stroke things that every organization within the CAN network really needs to be thinking about. And then we'll talk a little bit about some metrics that every organization should be measuring regardless of what your mission is. So the most important thing, and we talked about this a lot in the case, was the idea of that social construct, or what we called a social contract that you have with your donors. One of the struggles, I think, and I've worked with a lot of different nonprofits, is that it can't just be a conversation when we need money. It really needs to be a continual relationship. And part of that is that the individual nonprofits need to think about who their donors are and really collectively agree on what your values are, what you're trying to accomplish, and what that success is going to look like collectively. So your donors should have, if you think about kind of a shared governance model, they should have some sense of accountability and buy-in to what it is you're trying to accomplish as an organization, and how do we know what success looks like? And that should really be a conversation between both the organization and the key stakeholders internally, and then externally with your donors. And then you really need to engage the donors in the process as well. Again, going back to that sense of shared governance and accountability, it shouldn't just be a, hey, Jeff, I need money, donate to my organization, but really inviting the donors in to see the work that you're doing, so that they're not just seeing the business side. They really can be a part of making that action happen, and really see the work that you're doing outside of just the numbers that they're typically looking for. And then there does need to be kind of clear and consistent communication. Again, it shouldn't be a once a year, do you want to renew your donation? There should be continual and consistent communication with all of your donors and the stakeholders of your organization, and kind of communicating the work that you're doing, how the funding that you've already received is being utilized, and then just kind of a continual renewal of that contract. So kind of like the previous group said, there should be those regular check-in points, not just kind of a once a year, hey, it's July, do you want to donate again? The second recommendation that we have is that as you're determining together what success looks like for your organization, you really should focus initially on the overarching mission critical goals. And those are going to be different for every nonprofit within the CAN network. Some of them are going to focus on homelessness. Some of them might focus on education. Some of them may be focused on different social services, but all of the things that you're trying to evaluate or the things that are going to determine what success looks like should have some tie back to why you exist as an organization and what your critical mission goals are. And then all of your stakeholders, both internally and your donors, should really understand what that mission is and what role they play in that process. So where do volunteers fit in? Where do paid staff members fit in? Where do donors fit in terms of achieving those mission critical goals? The other thing that becomes really important when you start to think about your mission, as we've already talked about, it can be really hard to determine effectiveness of mission, particularly in nonprofits, because they tend to be very people and soft skill focused. But you really have to identify at least some ways that you can quantify your mission. Because as Dr. Lim has said, the qualitative research is great, but it really doesn't prove any correlation or causation. And so you really need to think about what are some ways that you can quantify. So if your mission is to focus on homelessness, how can you find a metric that's going to help say, okay, based on the number of people that we served, we've seen a decrease in homelessness in this area of the city that we specifically work in through this period of time. So thinking about some of the ways that you can add a number to what your mission is, that won't be the only thing that you're measuring, but it is important that you have some way to quantify what your mission is so that you know whether or not you're hitting those critical mission goals. And then the other thing that's really important, particularly in the nonprofit sector, is really having an annual needs assessment. So when you think about kind of service-oriented fields, the needs of the people that you're serving may change over time. So if you're working with a homeless population, the needs of that population are going to change. So what worked 2 or 3 years ago may not work 3 or 4 years from now. So there does need to be kind of an annual assessment of what the needs of your clientele are to make sure that you're able to meet your mission. So having some regular time that you're going to kind of think about that on an annual basis and make sure that what you're doing in terms of the programs and the things that you're providing and the services are actually meeting what the needs of that population is. And then the last thing, and this is something that I think can help kind of balance out the business tension, is finding creative ways to share your story. So the numbers can tell part of the story, but there are other opportunities to share the qualitative research. So sharing some of the stories, be that through a newsletter or having videos, or just finding kind of creative ways that you can share the work of the organization outside of just the numbers that you might be providing. So in thinking about the recommendations we would have for organizations in terms of what you need to be evaluating, there are really kind of 3 key things that every nonprofit should be looking at. So the first one is really the outcome or the impact measures. So how much better is this particular community or problem? And that can be really a quantitative or a qualitative analysis. I would imagine that in a lot of ways it should be both, because that's where you can really focus on your mission and your vision and quantifying that. So for instance, with the homeless organization, we have decreased homelessness by X% in, whatever neighborhood. But you could also focus on the quantitative side of, have you developed a particular skill set? And then how do you maybe measure what that looks like? And your outcome measures are really going to focus, if you think back to that strategic planning course that we had last semester, they're really going to focus on what the mission and the vision of the organization are and tie back to those things. Mm-hmm. The next thing that you really want to be looking at is your your outputs or your activity measures. So that's going to be your kind of deliverables. How many services did we offer? How many clienteles did we serve? How many people were assisted? And that really is going to be your quantitative evaluation, or what a lot of the donors might call kind of that business metric. Mm-hmm. That's really going to align in terms of the strategic planning process with the goals and strategies. So what are the specific things that we're doing to help meet our mission. What are the services? Again, how many people? And then the last thing that you're going to look at is your input and your capacity measure. And this can be something that's really important for the donors. They want to know how you're spending your money to make sure that you are fiduciarily being responsible with what you've been allocated. Put some clout behind the work that you're doing and prove that you're being responsible. So your input and capacity measures are really looking at how much of your resources were used to conduct all of those output and activity measures. So how much money did it take you to serve 50 clientele? And is that, are you being responsible in the way that you're doing that and kind of meeting your financial metrics? And that would tie in a little bit more to that tactical level of your strategic planning, and getting a little bit more into the granular of how much are we spending per client, or per program or per service. Jeff, I don't think we can hear you.
Have we lost Jeff? Let's see.
No, he's on there, but I can see him talking, but I can't hear him.
Let me see, participants. He's not muted.
Yeah, he's not muted. His mic's just not working.
Okay. No.
I hear you.
No, can't hear Jeff. No. No. We know you're there. Go ahead, Monica. Can you?
Yeah, I can run through. So
all right.
Yeah, some of the key takeaways. So thinking about what are some things that we can glean from this, or some things that can kind of tie into other things that we've talked about. One of the key takeaways is that it is incredibly difficult to measure the effectiveness of nonprofits, and part of what makes that really challenging is that it's tied to the organization's mission. And while any measure of effectiveness, even in business, is tied to that mission, because nonprofits focus on more of the soft things and more of the service side of things, it can be a little bit more difficult to figure out the right way to measure those overarching mission critical goals. And then organizational effectiveness in nonprofits is not based on any one objective standard. Whereas in business, you've got kind of line items and what was your return on investment, and there's kind of universally applied standards of success for that. In the social contract, it really is determined between people and based on that relationship, which can make it also, again, a little bit more challenging, but that's why it's so important to have that open communication and develop, what that agreement is between donors and nonprofits and the people that you're serving, because that's how you determine what that metric of success is. And then nonprofits are really dependent upon others for that investment and support, but it is really important that we're still able to measure the things that we do and provide that kind of hard data, because that's what's going to justify us asking for money or asking for additional resources or allocation. And ultimately, as leaders, it's our job to make sure that the organization exists 10 years from now. And the only way that we're going to be able to do that when we have a resource dependent organization is justifying the need for those resources and kind of verifying and providing some validity to how we're utilizing those resources in an effective manner to create social change. And then nonprofits that act more business-like kind of get that mixed response. So there has to be kind of that balance of both, because nonprofits often think, well, it's not about the numbers, it's about the people, but really kind of shifting that mindset and thinking about it really has to be both, and how can you, again, quantify what that mission is. And then communication with a lot of different stakeholders can be challenging, but is so critical to this process. And that's where things like that strategic planning and making sure that everyone's on board with where you're trying to go, what you're trying to accomplish, and how you're going to do it can be really important.
All right. Okay. Excellent. Just gets better and better. All right. I want to highlight a couple of points in the presentation. Monica said something there at the end that really almost knocked me out of my seat. I gotta remember. And y'all remind me that every time that we're together, either online or in person, that I need to remind you, number one goal of the organizational leader is to keep the organization alive. That's your number one goal. And sometimes you may even have to sacrifice yourself. But Monica's talking about, your organization still be there 10 years. That's your number one goal as an organizational leader, is to keep the organization alive. And if you're dependent upon external funding rather than selling widgets, this is mission critical. What we're talking about this morning, you got to keep the organization alive. Thanks, Jeff. That's fine. I want to talk about two of the points that was made in that presentation. What a wonderful presentation. First one I want to talk about is being responsible with money. I give my discretionary dollars to St. Jude because they publish an annual report. They're very responsible with their money. I know what their mission and vision is. Their mission is to serve sick children. Their mission vision is serve those. Vision is to serve those children, and their mission is to make sure it doesn't cost parents anything. That's their mission and vision. Very clear. And they're very responsible. They have the lowest overhead fees of any of organizations. I think 86% goes to their money goes to what it's supposed to be going to. Now, conversely, and if I insult you, I'm sorry, but I don't give money to United Way anymore. I used to work for an organization that conscripted us. I had a goal to meet in my division. If I didn't meet it, I had to write a check myself. I had to write a check up front. And that was okay until the scandal hit that the local United Way director was making over $1 million a year and was spending money on things that shouldn't have been spent on. Well, they quickly tried to cover that up and moved her out, and she sued and all that. But why I parted ways with them as a donor is they couldn't assure me that they were going to do anything to change that with the next person. I just didn't think they were responsible with the money. And they've kind of stumbled like down the staircase from one scandal to the next with that particular division. I'm not giving those people money because I don't think they're responsible with it. Now, if things happen that somebody does something inappropriate, you have a duty or responsibility to stop it as the leader of the organization. But you've also got to go back out and tell people what you're going to put in place to keep it from happening again if it does happen. So you've got to convince people that you're being responsible with the money, and if something does happen, you've got to convince them that we've put controls in place to stop that. And that's that responsibility function that you as the leader of the organization got to keep it alive. And that responsibility function is probably the single most important part of keeping it alive. Of a nonprofit is you got to convince people that you're being responsible with their dollars, that you're not wasting them. And that those two go together. That's the same side, two sides of the same coin, that responsibility function. All right, the other piece that I want to hit upon is I'm sitting here. Now, behind me, this way is my neighbor's house. I'm looking through my window across the water here, and I see some condos on the other side of the bay over here where I'm sitting right now. Like, that's Davidson. I'm in Cornelius. That's how close Davidson is. I can see the condos right across the bay here. That exit goes to the town of Davidson. And I can see it. And when the leaves are off, I can see some of the buildings over in Davidson. That's how close. So my neighbor behind, he and a very good friend that doesn't live in this neighborhood but lives in an adjoining neighborhood. They have real jobs, but a startup private school over in Davidson hired them to coach football. They both had coached in the police athletic league and, had coached the Pee-wees, and they've been very successful coaches. And private schools can't hire people as full-time coaches. And so they get basically neighborhood volunteers, community volunteers, and they pay them a little stipend, and they go over and they coach at, this startup private school over in Davis. They wanted them to come and work with them. And they did. Highly, highly successful in terms of wins and losses. But they didn't understand the social contract. The metric that they were using for success was how many football games they won. The problem was their school community, their parents' metric was, does my kid get to play? So they wanted to win, so they went out and recruited kids, what they call scholarship kids, who could actually play. The children of the actual people paying that $20,000 a year private school tuition, they couldn't play dead. They couldn't win a marble shoot. So they went and got them some people who could play, scholarship kids. They won. They won state titles in their little private school division. I think it was like 8 schools in their division of that size. They have, by size, it's the smallest one. And they thought they were doing well. The headmaster got dismissed, and so did they, because they didn't understand the social contract, that you can't bring in a bunch of, our kids are paying to come to school here, and some of them specifically were paying to be on the team and to get to play. They couldn't play at the large schools in this part of the world. I mean, the home high school here where I am has 3,000 students. It's 4 AA. They have grown men playing football. These kids, they couldn't be the equipment manager on a team like that. So their parents were looking for a place to buy them, the buying of the indulgences, not to get too ugly on the Catholics this morning, but the buying of the indulgences, they were buying their kids a place to go and play football, to have that Friday Night Lights experience, the boys of summer, to get to wear their leather jackets on Friday and their jerseys, and that experience of being a jock. They couldn't do that at the local high school. The crowd on the chess team at the local high school could whip them. So they were buying them a place to go and play. And so their metric of success is, does my kid get to wear his Letterman jacket and jersey on Friday and get to be on the field on Friday night? The coach's metric was, we want to win. That crowd, they can't play dead. We got to get somebody who can play. They did not, the coaches didn't understand the social contract of why they were there. And so they couldn't understand, we've won 3 straight state titles. We've had, one of the coach's sons, he went on to the University of Florida, and now he's in the NFL. Kid from our neighborhood, he's now a quarterback in the NFL. Look what we've done. They did not use the same metrics or measures of success, and that is the social contract. And so that's what you have to understand. That's the social contract. You've got to both value the same thing. And so that's how you explain, may not be the best example, but that's how I explain social contract. They were winning ball games. Coaches were happy. They were winning ball games, but the parents who were paying the bills weren't happy, because they weren't getting out of that nonprofit what they were paying for. And so everybody may not have everybody's idea of what success is not the same. And that's the social contract that you have to be aware of, and make sure, as you said, that you get everybody together and you have agreement as to what the social contract is. And so for little football teams like that, you've got to figure out, how many of those scholarship players can we get? How many is enough to win and not too many? And that's what you've got to figure out. That's where that is. What a wonderful presentation. We got one more this morning?
Yes, good morning.
All right, so Jewel, you're gonna be the one?
Yes, sir.
All right, so I'm gonna go to participants. As Jewel. I'm going to reclaim host. I'm now going to make Jewel the host. Yes. I'm going to stop my share. And if Jewel, if you will click on your share button, we'll see your screen.
Yes, sir. Let's see here. Okay,
There we go. Excellent.
Okay, good morning. Can everybody hear me?
You
Okay,
can.
awesome.
Wonderful. Thank you.
So our was the case study measuring organizational effectiveness in the nonprofit sector. Joel Harrington, Stephen Harris, Michelle, and Rose. So we're going to go on into our case study. Okay, so our central issue, we kind of looked at it from a little bit of a different perspective. We went back to some of the things that we learned in Dr. Jones's class, and we thought that our main issue was trouble expressing financial forecasting to align with measurable standards. We thought that this issue kind of really went back to the culture problem. So we looked back at that in Dr. Jones's class. So as you can see, the things that we can see is our, food, fashion, language, literature. But then we went back to look at the things that you can't see, which is our facial expressions, attitude, religion, our problem-solving skills, financial distress, our core values. And we felt like the communication styles and that business model kind of fell under that deep culture of the cultural iceberg. So that's why we kind of felt that this was a cultural problem when it came to reevaluating the business model.
Hope it doesn't go out. It went away now. I don't know. Hey, can y'all look at that? Make sure that.
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, well, I can hear you. We see the slide, the culture of nonprofit versus profit, secondary issues.
Yes.
What's on our screen?
All right. So I'm covering the secondary issues. So we saw that the culture of the nonprofit was very different from the culture of the for-profit. The nonprofits are more dependent on their resources and financial support, but for-profit, they can simply just take their profits and reinvest it back into the business, their business operations, and keep it going. The for-profit was a little bit more straightforward and focuses on the financial metrics, whereas the nonprofit is more focused on the mission. And the nonprofit organizations want to kind of impact things that are kind of different, difficult to measure, such as like the social improvement or the personal well-being. Whereas, like, we can have 500 clients, but how many did we really impact? What were the changes there? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we're picking up background noise. Let me see if I can mute everybody, and you'll have to. Okay, what we're going to have to do here is everybody mute themselves except for Stefan.
Yes.
There we go.
Okay. All right. Nonprofits were a little bit more ideological versus for-profits being more practical, thinking that the focus should solely rely on the quality of work, regardless of how the numbers actually play out. Where for-profits are looking at, well, what's our return on investment? What's going on here? The next one was organizational responsiveness with communication, the need for consistent interactions with the stakeholders to establish and maintain perceptions of the service and make sure that we're on the right track. Are we, where are the resources going, so that they can continue to support And then the economic downturn, the budget cuts and decreased tax revenues. With the economy changing and competitors are growing, there's more pressure from the funders for the nonprofits there.
Stephen, we lost you. You're now muted. So who's next?
So we have 5 recommendations
Yeah,
to build a measuring tool that evaluates nonprofit services that will sustain the organization, learn how to measure nonprofit effectiveness using quantitative data, strengthen how to measure nonprofit effectiveness using qualitative data, report the trends collected from the data that are reflective of equitable best practices, increase communication with all stakeholders to ensure the measurement standards are visible within the culture of our nonprofit. So some things for quantity and effort, or how much service do we deliver, or how much change did we produce? As far as quality, how well did we deliver it, and what quality of change did we produce? So there's very importance of both quantitative and qualitative. Qualitative is used to understand people's beliefs, experiences, attitudes, behavior. Quantitative consists of theory, hypothesis, creating experimental and control groups, and collecting data, analysis and data, and reporting findings. I think it's Rose.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Sorry.
Hey, Rose.
I'm behind you guys for sure, or ahead. It depends on how you want to look at it. But anyway, the top healthcare priorities and managing costs, and that's one of the big things, because there's such a difference with healthcare in the for-profit versus the not-for-profit. But the number one issue is managing costs, especially in today's times. And there are a number of articles out there that say that, and Dr. Lamb, you said it just a little while ago, money is not infinite. And that's
right.
Some of the non-for-profits are starting to find out the hard way.
Yes.
They don't know their numbers. Excuse me, not even close. And they don't know how to manage their resources because they feel that they are infinite, you know, that they don't have any constraints. It's especially seen, I see it in real life here, because I'm out on the West Coast. They have a lot of the tech companies, they donate. I'm working under, you know, like Benioff gave a lot of money to the University of California here, or San Francisco. And the money, though, was given in 2014. And now, well, by 2019, it was like gone.
Yeah.
What are they going to do? What are they going to do? How are they going to work this? And so now they're starting to try to think of different ways that they can save money. But the culture of the not-for-profit is so different, because working in a for-profit, they're focused on how they're going to maintain, and they know that they're going to be able to continue on because they've got a good handle on their financial situation. Taxes are a big thing too for the profit versus the nonprofit. Ways your strategies, you look at it, the structure and the culture. There's also things that are physical. As the not-for-profit are not paying taxes. So there is a lot of different ways that they invest their money, you know, since they're not paying the taxes, they have more physical things like land and structures and personnel. Whereas if you are for-profit, you're focused on your shareholders. you reinvest in the business different way than you would if you were a not-for-profit. So aim of doing the good for the people in a not-for-profit is the main thing, is not knowing how to measure that and how to project that this is what you have done. And it's not it's something that if you're giving services, you have to be able to define when does it stop, because that's another thing, that money is not infinite. It is, you know, like out here you have an influx of a lot of you know, other people from other countries, and that they have no line on when that stops, and that's making it so that it's hard for their financial survival unless they can get other donations to be able to come up with ways to save money. Is not even going to come close to what they would have to pay out. The next slide is I'm sorry. Go ahead.
We have 4 alternative solutions that helped us create our final timeline. The first one is a good solution. We decided that a strategic plan is needed to truly combine the measurable qualitative and quantitative data. A mixed alternative would be to restructure. It's the whole team has mentioned the culture is important, but restructuring to truly identify standardized, accountable, equitable measurements is important. The reason we highlighted equitable measurements is because similar to the other groups, nonprofit organizations do so many different things and provide so many different services. So in order to have a standardized measurement tool, it needs to be equitable for all the organizations that we're helping to provide funding to. Another mixed alternative would be to increase the pledges and really address the economic downturn. And then a blend alternative we thought about was just to implement professional development for existing nonprofit employees that we're working with, to once again address and really communicate with the stakeholders by implementing a new marketing tool. Dr. Lamb, you talked about United Way or St. Jude's. And so those are organizations that really have a marketing plan, and the organization in Texas really needs to focus on how to get their information to all the stakeholders within the community.
All right, so our action plan is to develop innovative standards to measure outcomes of nonprofit effectiveness using a combination of qualitative and quantitative data reflective of equitable nonprofit services. And as I said earlier, we need both the organizations for nonprofit and for. So quantitative research is now recognized for its ability to add a new dimension to interventional studies that cannot be obtained through just measurement of variables alone. So qualitative is very important. Quantitative, again, is to collect data, analyze data, and report findings. So businesses need both to keep going. Okay, the next slide, we did a timeline. And I'll go over it. We broke it down into 12 weeks. So for our task, our first week, we said we would complete a SWOT analysis of equitable measurement of nonprofit services. Week 2, we said we would conduct a good fit analysis. Very important to make sure your business is where it should be. Week 3, we said we would hold a town meeting or hear feedback on new measurement for standards that will measure nonprofit services. Week 4, we said we would complete a task force team and board of directors. They would meet to develop a plan to collect data. Week 5, we would develop a committee to chair reports. Week 6, we would notify patrons of measurement standards. And for 6 and 7, we would distribute letters of data plan to the stakeholders. Week 7, we said we would collect qualitative data to see how our business is going. And then, of course, you would have to analyze. So week 8, we would analyze the qualitative data. Week 9, we would collect quantitative data. And for weeks 10 through 12, we would analyze to see where we're at that time. And the 11 and 12, we would assess trends in the data to see if it's working. And our last week, we would the committee chairs would share data with task force to determine the next steps for baseline collected to see if what else we would need to do. And that is our plan.
Love it. Love it. All right. Is that everybody this morning?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. All right, for the last group, what a wonderful presentation. You know, I'm a big action plan, strategic plan person. That's my deal. But I'm quantitative, and so I love those kinds of things. All right, so I see parts of every course that you've been in. You're beginning to assimilate all this stuff. It's not just random ideas in your head. You begin to put some order to it. So I have a question that I knew we'd finally get to the SWOT analysis this morning. And for the last presentation. All right, this is for the final group or for all of you. All right, I'm a nonprofit in the community. I'm serving an underserved population. If I did a SWOT analysis, threat, and the threat part of the SWOT analysis, what 2 groups will be opposed to expansion or continuation of my nonprofit? What 2 groups? Think about it for a minute. I'm a nonprofit in the community providing services to an underserved population. What 2 groups will be opposed to me automatically?
Other nonprofits.
Might be other people who serve or want to serve that population. They will be opposed to my expansion or my continuation. That might be other nonprofits. It might be for-profits. For example, Limestone's not happy when our enrollment goes up at Gardner Webb. The rising tide does not lift all boats. And so if Limestone's in Gaffney, that's the closest college to us, and they're similar. What happens if our enrollment goes up in our nonprofit? What happens to theirs?
Probably going down.
It probably goes down. That is correct. And so you've got to understand that not everybody's going to be your champion. Everybody's not going to want you to succeed because it comes at their expense. And so that's part of that threat. This is, this going away from this, wrapping up this case study is we face these, we look at these things from everybody we want to do more good. We do good. That's the qualitative. We're serving our clients well. We want to serve more. Our numbers. We're trying to make our case to the public and to the funders. But there's also going to be detractors. There's going to be threats because if we go up, somebody else goes down. Because as we were just talking about, money is not finite. I mean, it's not infinite. There's one goes up, one goes down. So you're always going to have, and you need to identify who those people are. And maybe you can join in some kind of consortium or partnership with them. But there's going to be detractors out there because you've taken their business. That's number 1. And number 2, and my final point this morning, sometimes this has happened in the community that I live in here at Lake Norman. Sometimes the community itself will be opposed. That not in my backyard, what's that, NAMBY? What happens if you want to open a homeless shelter in a community, or you want to expand the existing one, or you want to have the big argument since I've lived here for 24 years in this house that I'm sitting in right now. I'm still new, but I'm 24 years I've lived in this house. And the whole 24 years that I've been here, we can't come to any kind of accommodation of an animal shelter here in town because nobody wants it in their community. It's a nonprofit. It does good things, but nobody wants it. Nobody wants barking dogs near them. The smell, the trouble, nobody wants it. Nobody wants a homeless shelter here. We don't have one. We've got Habitat where we build houses. We've got a Habitat restore in the Old Town Cornelius. We didn't want it on this side. On this side, the lake side, where the beautiful people live, we've got a Goodwill store that's better than department stores in most neighborhoods in this state, since this is the richest town in North Carolina. Our Goodwill it's like shopping it's better than the Belks in Rutherford County. I can tell you that. The Goodwill store here is. We can have one of those, but we couldn't have the restore. You know who shops at the restore. It's over in the old part of town. We tried to do something on this side, but we can't do that. Can't have them people over here. If you had a restore over here on the nice side of town, those people would come over here. They got to stay on that side of the bridge. They can't come over on this side. So you got a lot of that not in my backyard when you're doing nonprofits. And so that's part of that threat. You've got the threat from your competitors, the people who are trying to provide the same goods or services. And then you've got the actual communities that you're trying to serve. You have I guess part of it goes back to the social contract. We want to help homeless people, not in our neighborhood. We want to do it in somebody else's neighborhood. So those are the threats. And that I wanted to make sure I hit on that at the end. We thank you in that last presentation. We'll go back to strategic planning and SWOT analysis from, 732. I want to make sure that we hit that. All right, so here is your charge going forward. Make sure that each one of you upload in your assignment Dropbox. Let me go back to that. Do a share screen. All right, so in our Blackboard shell, move that out of the way. In our Blackboard shell, over here on the side, it says case study Dropbox. And so your PowerPoint presentation from today, and then your written reflection. And the last thing I want to say this morning, and we're going to actually get done early, is in your written reflection, I want you to do me one personal favor in your written reflection. I don't think this is in any of the directions. If you could, and if you can't, that's fine, but if you could, put a little sentence or two in there about implications for you in your current role from this case study, or the courses, or this course, all the course. What at this point, what does this mean for you? What you've been learning in your current role? I want you just to drop me a couple sentences. I always love to read those. It helps me in my preparation and going forward. What does this mean to you? It's because it's a personal reflection, but relate it to your current role. We lead from where we are. So how does it affect us in our leadership role where we are right now? And I like for you to reflect on that. It's pretty enlightening for you, and it helps me as well. So if you'll add that, and then put your written reflection in right there, and just drop those in. I appreciate you being with me this morning.
I have a quick question. Does just one person from the group need to upload the presentation, or does everybody?
No, everybody has a Dropbox. No, everybody put your presentation in, and everybody needs a grade for it. You shared in it jointly, so everybody upload both your group's presentation in that box and your personal reflection. And if you would, as a favor to me, in your personal reflection, if you will say, this is how this impacts me, or these are implications for me in my current role. Because everybody, we stress, and it gets us thinking again. We all need to lead from where we are, and that's the link back to our overarching Doctor of Education in Organizational Leadership. How does this affect me in my role? What are the implications for me leading where I am? Okay. Anything else for the good of the group before we go? All right, so we're back online again in what, 2 weeks? 2 weeks?
Yes,
All
sir.
right. Y'all don't have too big a time tomorrow at your Super Bowl party. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.